Jin's boots echoed against the metal floor as he pushed through the crowded marketplace on Station Omega-7. The massive space station rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity that made his twin plasma revolvers feel heavier on his hips. Neon signs flickered in a dozen alien languages, advertising everything from exotic weapons to stolen starship parts. The bounty hunter had tracked the Vorthan crime lord Kekstar here, but his target had vanished into the station's maze-like lower levels. Now Jin found himself in the notorious flesh market, where beings from across the galaxy came to buy and sell sentient creatures like livestock. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and fear. Reptilian Zulkari merchants hissed at potential customers while insectoid Thrax clicked their mandibles in negotiation. A massive, tentacled Morgan rolled past on hoverpads, its dozens of eyes scanning the merchandise with cold calculation. Jin had seen slave markets before. They all smelled the same, desperation mixed with greed. His weathered face remained expressionless as he moved through the crowd, but his hand never strayed far from his weapons. At 38, he'd been hunting criminals across 3-star systems for over a decade, and nothing in this galaxy surprised him anymore. That changed when he saw her, on the central auction platform. Bathed in harsh spotlights, stood a young human woman. Her pristine white robes were torn and stained, revealing she wore the sacred garments of Terra's holy order. The ceremonial blue sash across her chest marked her as a fully ordained nun, probably from one of the missionary ships that traveled the outer rim spreading human faith to alien worlds. But it wasn't her religious attire that made Jin stop walking. It was her eyes. Most slaves on the auction block had dead, hopeless stares. They'd been broken by their captors, reduced to empty shells waiting for new masters. This woman was different. Her dark eyes burned with such fierce defiance that Jin half expected the platform beneath her to catch fire. Her hands were bound behind her back with energy shackles, but she stood straight and proud, chin raised in silent challenge to everyone watching. She was beautiful, Jin realized, but not in the fragile way that collectors usually preferred. Her beauty was like a plasma blade, brilliant, dangerous, and absolutely unbreakable. The auctioneer, a fat Huradian with purple skin and forearms, gestured dramatically toward her. Behold, a genuine human female from the Sacred Order of Terrors, light, captured during the unfortunate destruction of the missionary vessel St. Catherine. Jin's jaw clenched. He knew that ship. The St. Catherine had been carrying medical supplies to plague-stricken colonies in the Andromeda Spiral. These scum had probably ambushed a mercy mission. Notice the exquisite bone structure. The auctioneer continued, his translator device making his voice boom across the marketplace. The rare combination of purity and spirit, perfect for the discriminating collector who desires both beauty and entertainment value. Disgusted murmurs and excited clicks rippled through the alien crowd. Jin saw a Morgan industrialist extend several tentacles in interest, while a group of wealthy Zulkari began whispering among themselves. In the back, a figure in expensive robes, probably from the hegemony's core worlds, watched with the calculating stare of someone used to owning people. Bidding starts at 10,000 credits, the auctioneer announced. Immediately, voices called out from the crowd. The Morgan's translator box crackled as it bid 15,000. The Zulkari consortium countered with 20,000. Within minutes, the price had climbed to 40,000 credits. Jin watched the woman's face throughout the bidding. She never flinched, never showed fear, even as aliens discussed her like a prized piece of art. When the hegemony representative bid 45,000, she actually smiled, a cold, predatory expression that suggested whoever bought her would regret it. 50,000 from the distinguished representative of His Imperial Majesty. The auctioneer cried. Do I hear 55? The Morgan's tentacles writhed as it considered the price. 50,000 credits could buy a small starship or fund a mining operation. For a single human, even a rare one, it was an astronomical sum. Go in once, the auctioneer called. Go in twice. Jin had seen enough. He'd spent the last 3 years tracking bounties across the galaxy, accumulating a small fortune in credits. He'd been saving for his own ship, maybe a place to retire where. The Bounty Hunters Guild couldn't find him. All those credits, all those dangerous jobs, all those sleepless nights dodging plasma fire in asteroid fields. One look at those defiant eyes, and Jin knew exactly what he had to do with his life savings. 100,000. He called out, his voice cutting through the marketplace chatter like a vibroblade through silk. The entire crowd fell silent. Even the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed to pause. 100,000. Credits was more than most beings saw in their entire lives. The auctioneer's eyes widened in shock. On the platform, the woman turned to stare at Jin. For the first time since he'd arrived, he saw something other than anger in her expression. Confusion flickered across her features, followed by something that might have been hope. Their eyes met across the crowded marketplace, and Jin felt something shift in his chest. He'd just spent his entire fortune on a complete stranger, and somehow, looking at her face, he knew it was the smartest thing he'd ever done. The transaction completed with a soft chime from the payment terminal, Jin walked up to the auction platform, ignoring the whispered conversations and angry glares from the other bidders. The hegemony representative looked particularly furious. His pale face had turned an ugly shade of red beneath his expensive hood. "Congratulations on your purchase," the auctioneer said, his forearms making elaborate gestures. "The merchandise comes with standard health guarantees and—" "She's not merchandise," Jin interrupted, his voice cold as deep space. "She's a person." The Huradian's purple skin darkened with confusion. "Of course, sir. However you prefer to categorize your acquisition." Jin stepped onto the platform where Hannah stood waiting. Up close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes despite her defiant posture. There were bruises on her arms where the energy shackles had burned her skin, and her white robes were stained with engine oil and alien blood. "You're free," Jin said simply. Pulling a plasma knife from his belt, the energy blade hummed to life, casting blue light across both their faces. Hannah tensed, unsure if he meant to hurt her, but Jin simply reached behind her and sliced through the energy restraints. The shackles fell to the platform with a metallic clatter, and she brought her hands forward, rubbing her raw wrists. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice hoarse from hours of silence. Her eyes searched his face, looking for the catch, the hidden price that always came with freedom in places like this. Jin holstered the plasma knife and met her gaze directly. "Nothing. Just don't like slavers." For a moment, they stared at each other in the harsh spotlight. Hannah had expected demands, conditions, some twisted purpose that would explain why someone would spend a fortune on her. Instead, she found herself looking at a man with tired eyes and calloused hands, someone who looked like he'd seen too much of the galaxy's darkness. "That's it," she whispered. "You spent 100,000 credits just because. Company. And hostiles approaching from 3 directions." The warning came from Jin's wrist communicator just as the first plasma bolt sizzled past Hannah's ear. The marketplace erupted into chaos as the Zulkari merchants who had originally captured her opened fire, determined to reclaim their valuable property. Jin moved like lightning, his twin plasma revolvers appearing in his hands as if by magic. The weapons sang their deadly song, a high-pitched whine followed by the crack of superheated air. His first shot took down the Zulkari warrior who was raising an energy rifle, the alien scale smoking as it collapsed. "Get down," Jin shouted. pushing Hannah behind overturned vendor stall as more plasma fire erupted around them. The nun crouched in the makeshift cover, watching in horrified fascination as Jin carved a path through their enemies. He moved with fluid precision, each shot carefully placed, each step calculated to keep them both alive. The insectoid Thrax tried to flank them from the left, but Jin spun and put to bolt's centimass before it could fire. "Violence is sin," Hannah whispered, more to herself than to him. The words of her training echoed in her mind even as she watched Jin save both their lives. "So is slavery," Jin replied without missing a beat, ejecting spent power cells from his weapons and slamming in fresh ones. "Pick your poison." A massive explosion rocked the marketplace as someone threw a plasma grenade. Smoke and sparks filled the air while emergency lights began flashing through the haze. Hannah could see more armed figures approaching, some in Zilkari combat armor, others wearing the black uniforms of station security who had clearly been bought off. "This way." Jin grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a maintenance corridor. They ran through the smoky chaos as plasma bolts lit up the air around them, behind them. She could hear the heavy footsteps of pursuing aliens and the mechanical whir of combat drones being deployed. The corridor led to a vertical shaft with a service ladder. Jin went first, his guns holstered but ready, while Hannah climbed after him. Her robes made the ascent difficult, but fear gave her strength. Below them, angry voices echoed in multiple alien languages. They emerged onto an observation deck overlooking the main docking bay. Through the massive transparent aluminum windows, Hannah could see dozens of spacecraft of every size and design, sleek racing ships, bulky cargo haulers, and deadly-looking fighters bristling with weapons. There, Jin pointed to a mid-sized vessel, with angular lines and weapon ports. "That's my ship, the Wanderer. We get there, we're gone. They'll never let us reach it," Hannah said, watching security teams flood into the docking bay below. "Look at all those guards." Jin smiled grimly and pulled out a small device. "Good thing I don't play fair." He pressed a button, and suddenly alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency bulkheads started closing, and automated fire suppression systems activated in random sections. The lights flickered as the station's main computer tried to process multiple false emergency signals. "Computer virus," Jin explained, seeing her confused expression. "Been uploading it to every station system since I got here. Amazing what a little paranoia and preparation can do in the chaos below." Security forces scrambled to respond to dozens of fake emergencies. Some ran toward imaginary hull breaches, while others rushed to contain fires that didn't exist. The path to Jin's ship was suddenly much clearer. "You planned this?" Hannah asked as they made their way toward another access shaft. "Always have an exit strategy," Jin replied. "Galaxies full of people who want to shoot you. Best to be ready when they try." They dropped down into the docking bay through a maintenance hatch, landing near a row of parked speeders. The artificial gravity felt different here, lighter, making each step feel like a small bounce. Emergency lights cast everything in red, and the air tasted of recycled oxygen and engine coolant. The Wanderer sat in docking bay 7. Its hull scarred from countless encounters, but its engines humming with barely contained power. As they approached, the ship's entry ramp lowered automatically, recognizing Jin's biosignature. "Welcome aboard," Jin said, gesturing for Hannah to climb the ramp first. She paused at the entrance, looking back at the chaotic station where she had been a slave just minutes ago. Everything had changed so quickly. One moment she was facing a life of misery. The next she was boarding a stranger's ship with no idea what came next. "Why?" she asked one more time. "Why did you really save me?" Jin was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on something distant. Because somebody should have saved my sister, he said finally. But nobody did. Before Hannah could respond, plasma fire erupted behind them as their pursuers finally tracked them down. Jin's hand found her back, gently but firmly guiding her up the ramp as the ship's automated defenses came online. Questions later, he said, already moving toward the cockpit. Right now, we fly. The Wanderer jumped to hyperspace with a brilliant flash of blue light, leaving station Omega-7 far behind. In the ship's small common area, Hannah sat across from Jin at a metal table bolted to the deck, the hyperspace tunnel outside the viewports created shifting patterns of light that danced across their faces as they traveled between the stars. The Lord works through all things, Hannah said, clutching a small prayer book she'd managed to keep hidden during her captivity. Even terrible events serve his greater purpose. Jin looked up from the star charts spread across the table, his expression skeptical. Really? Then explain these. He pointed to a series of red markers scattered across the holographic display. Kepler 4 to be New Damascus, Haven Colony, all slave worlds, all officially protected by something called divine mandate from your holy order. Hannah leaned forward to study the charts, her brow furrowing. That's impossible. The order would never. Never what? Turn a blind eye to suffering if it meant keeping the peace with alien governments. Jin's finger traced a trade route connecting the marked worlds. These planets pay tribute to the hegemony. In return, they get religious protection and the right to keep using human slaves for their mining operations. The nun's hands trembled slightly. She read the data streams flowing beside each marker. Population statistics, export manifests, mortality rates, all painting a picture of systematic oppression blessed by the very organization she'd devoted her life to serving. The order brings salvation to the Outer Rim, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. We heal the sick, feed the hungry, and ignore the enslaved, Jen finished. He pulled up another chart showing shipping lanes. See this route. Every month, transport ships carry volunteers from human colonies to work in the Vorthen crystal mines. Funny thing about volunteers, they never seem to come back home. Hannah stared at the evidence, her faith and reality colliding like matter. And antimatter, there must be an explanation. Perhaps the local authorities. Your God lets children suffer, Jin said bluntly, his weathered face hard as asteroid rock. I've seen the mining camps, Hannah. Kids as young as 8 working 20-hour shifts in toxic atmosphere. Where's the divine intervention there? God works in mysterious ways. Hannah replied automatically, but her voice wavered like a ship losing power. The words felt hollow in her mouth, the programmed response that no longer seemed adequate for the horrors Jin was showing her. Jin leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. That's what they taught you to say when reality doesn't match. The scripture, isn't it? When the universe gets too complicated for simple answers. Before Hannah could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A distress signal filled the cabin, transmitted on the emergency frequency used by human vessels throughout the galaxy. Mayday, Mayday. This is the missionary ship St. Peter calling any vessels in range. We are under attack by unknown hostiles. Our shields are failing and we have wounded aboard. Please respond. Hannah shot to her feet, her training overriding her confusion. We have to help them. They're our people. Jin was already at the sensor console, his fingers dancing across the controls. The long-range scanners painted a tactical picture on the main display. One human ship surrounded by 3 larger vessels of unknown configuration. It's bait, Jin said after studying the readings for 30 seconds. Those aren't pirates or raiders. Look at the formation. Perfectly coordinated. Weapons charged, but not firing for maximum damage. They want that ship intact. You don't know that. Hannah moved to the pilot's station, her hands hovering over the navigation controls. Even if there's risk, we can't abandon fellow humans. We leave now, Jin said firmly. Reaching past her to lock out the navigation system, I've seen this exact setup before. They capture one ship, use it to lure in rescue vessels, then take everyone prisoner for the slave markets. The distress call continued, growing more desperate. In the background, they could hear explosions and shouting. A woman's voice, probably. The ship's captain, calling for anyone to help her crew. They're dying. Hannah grabbed Jin's arm, her eyes blazing with the same defiance he'd seen on the auction platform. How can you just sit here and listen to this? Because rushing in without a plan helps nobody, Jin replied. But even as he spoke, he was running combat calculations in his head. 3 enemy ships and known capabilities. Probably armed with capture nets and boarding equipment rather than ship killers. Help them die, because that's what'll happen if we charge in there. He continued, they'll have us both in chains within an hour, and that missionary crew will still be prisoners. But Hannah was no longer listening to reason. Her faith, shaken by Jin's revelations, had found new purpose in the distress call. While he was analyzing sensor data, she managed to override the navigation lockout, the trick she'd learned during her technical training at the seminary. The Wanderer's engines roared to life, pulling them out of hyperspace near the combat zone. Immediately, alarms began shrieking as hostile sensors locked onto their hull. "What have you done?" Jin shouted, throwing himself into the pilot's seat as plasma fire erupted round them. The trap sprung with mechanical precision. The 3 attacking ships, sleek Zulkai hunters built for capturing rather than destroying, immediately broke formation to sound the Wanderer. Tractor beams lanced out from their hulls, trying to lock onto Jin's ship and drag it into their cargo holds. Deploying countermeasures, Jin's hands flew across the controls, launching metallic chaff that confused the enemy sensors and jamming frequencies that disrupted their targeting systems. The Wanderer rolled and dove, its engine screaming as Jin pushed them beyond safe limits. The missionary ship. Hannah pointed at the main display where the St. Peter hung motionless. Clearly disabled, but not destroyed. We can still save them. Look. Closer. Jin growled, executing a spinning maneuver that made Hannah's stomach lurch. No hull breaches. No atmosphere venting. Engines intact but offline. They were never in real danger, just playing dead to make the distress call convincing. On the display, the St. Peter's engine suddenly flared to life. Instead of fleeing the area, it moved to join the attacking formation, its cargo bay opening to reveal armed boarding pods. Hannah stared in shock as the truth hit her like a plasma bolt to the chest. They're working together. Welcome to the real galaxy, Jin said grimly, launching a spread of concussion missiles at the nearest Zulkari ship, where even missionaries sometimes traffic in human lives. The space battle raged round them as Jin used every trick he'd learned in 20 years of avoiding death. He flew the Wanderer through an asteroid field, using the floating rocks as cover while the enemy ships tried to box them in. Plasma fire lit up the void like deadly fireworks, and the ship shuddered under near misses, hull integrity at 70%. The computer announced in its calm electronic voice, "Recommend immediate withdrawal from combat zone." Working on it, Jin threw the ship into a desperate climb above the orbital plane, trying to break free of the enemy formation. Behind them, the boarding pods were gaining ground, their pilots apparently willing to ram the Wanderer if necessary. Only Jin's quick thinking and intimate knowledge of his ship's capabilities saved them both. He diverted power from life support to the engines, giving them just enough speed to reach the hyperspace jump point. The Wanderer vanished in a burst of twisted light, leaving their pursuers behind in normal space. In the sudden quiet that followed, Hannah sat in stunned silence. Everything she'd believed about her mission, her order, and her faith had been shattered in the space of a few hours. The missionary ship, she whispered, they were selling people too. Jin nodded grimly as he checked their course for pursuit. Now you're starting to understand. The galaxy's full of wolves, Hannah. Some wear alien scales, others wear holy robes, but they're all the same underneath. Hannah looked down at her own torn robes, wondering for the first time what they really represented. Outside the viewports, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to human suffering and divine promises alike. The Wanderer touched down on Haven Colony 3 days later. Its landing thrusters kicking up red dust from the planet's iron-rich soil. Haven was a small human settlement on the edge of civilized space, far from the major trade routes and government oversight, perfect for a people who wanted to disappear and start over. Hannah stepped off the ship into warm afternoon air that smelled of growing things and honest work. After the recycled atmosphere of space stations and starships, the natural breeze felt like a blessing. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, covered in golden grain that swayed in the wind like ocean waves. Not much to look at, Jin said, checking his weapons out of habit. But the people here mind their own business. We can lay low until the heat dies down. They walked into the small town center, past simple buildings made from local stone and timber. Children played in the dusty streets while their parents worked in shops and gardens. It reminded Hannah of the farming communities she'd visited during her missionary training, before she learned about the darkness hiding behind the Order's good works. "You folks look like you've had some trouble," said a voice behind them. They turned to see an elderly man with weathered hands and kind eyes, wearing simple farmer's clothes. His face was lined with years of sun and honest labor, but there was something in his bearing that suggested education and wisdom beyond his humble appearance. "I'm Minho," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Welcome to Haven. You hungry? My wife always makes too much dinner. Over a meal of fresh bread and vegetable stew." Minho listened to their story without judgment. When Hannah mentioned her connection to the Holy Order, something flickered in the old farmer's eyes. "I used to wear robes like yours," he said quietly. "Long time ago, before I learned that God doesn't live in buildings made by human hands." Hannah looked up from her bowl, surprised. "You were a priest for 15 years, served on 3 different worlds, preached to anyone who'd listen." Minho's weathered face grew distant. "Then I saw what the Order really was. The politics, the money, the way they'd make deals with anyone who had power, even if it meant turning away from suffering." "What happened?" Hannah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "There was a famine on Kepler 186F, thousands dying while the planetary government stockpiled grain to sell off-world. I asked the Order to intervene, to use their influence to help." Minho's hands tightened round his cup. "They told me it wasn't my place to interfere with local politics, said God would provide. But he didn't," Hannah whispered. "Maybe he did. Maybe he provided me with eyes to see the truth." Minho gestured toward the window, where his fields stretched toward the horizon. "I found God in the fields, not in cathedrals, in the work of my hands, the food I grow, the neighbors I help when they're in need." That night, lying in a simple bed in Minho's guest room, Hannah stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of God would allow his servants to turn away from suffering. The stars outside her window offered no answers, just cold light from distant suns. She was still wrestling with these thoughts when the attack came. The first explosion shattered the pre-dawn quiet. A brilliant flash that lit up the sky like artificial daylight. Hannah rolled out of bed and ran to the window, her heart pounding as she saw smoke rising from the colony's communication center. Slavers, someone shouted in the street below. "They're jamming our transmissions." Through her window, Hannah could see armed figures moving between the buildings. Tall, reptilian Zulkari warriors in combat armor. They moved with military precision, surrounding key buildings and herding colonists into the town square. This wasn't a random raid. It was a carefully planned harvesting operation. Jin appeared at her door, fully dressed and armed. They tracked. "US here somehow. Stay low and follow my lead." They slipped out through the back of Minho's house, moving carefully through the pre-dawn darkness. The old farmer was already gone, probably helping evacuate his neighbors. In the distance, Hannah could hear plasma fire and shouting as the colonists tried to organize a defense. There, Jin pointed to a group of Zulkari setting up a heavy weapons platform near the grain silos. "If I can take out their support weapons, the colonists might have a chance." He moved like a ghost through the shadows, his twin plasma revolvers ready. Hannah watched from cover as he approached the enemy position, every muscle in his body coiled for action. This was what he did best, violence in service of protecting the innocent. The attack went perfectly at first. Jin's opening shots took down to Zulkari before they knew he was there. But as he moved to finish the third, a net of energy erupted from the darkness behind him. Capture protocols. Designed to take prisoners alive. Hannah started to run toward him. But more nets flew through the air. She dove behind a water barrel as Jin disappeared under crackling energy bombs, his weapons clattering to the ground. "Excellent," hissed a familiar voice, the famous Jin the Hunter. Worth almost as much as a dozen colonists. Through the smoke and chaos, Hannah saw the lead Zulkari remove his helmet, revealing the scarred face of Vextar, the slaver captain whose operation they disrupted on Station Omega-7. He'd followed them across half the galaxy for revenge. "Secure the human." Vextar ordered his warriors. The hegemony pays extra for bounty hunters. They dragged Jin's unconscious form toward their transport ship while the battle raged round them. Hannah pressed herself against the water barrel, her mind racing. The colonists were fighting bravely, but they were farmers and shopkeepers, not soldiers. Without Jin's expertise, they were being overwhelmed. She stood at the crossroads of everything she'd ever believed, watching smoke rise from burning homes while good people suffered, in her hand. She clutched the small prayer book that had sustained her faith through years of service. On the ground nearby lay Jin's spare blaster, dropped when the energy nets had taken him. The book represented everything she'd been taught, that violence was sin, that the faithful should turn the other cheek, that God would provide justice in his own time. The weapon represented Jin's philosophy, that sometimes good people had to fight to protect the innocent, that waiting for divine intervention meant watching evil triumph. A child's scream cut through the night as Zulkari warriors dragged a family from their burning home. "Sometimes," Hannah whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of battle, "faith means fighting back." She dropped the prayer book and picked up Jin's spare blaster. The weapon felt heavy in her hands, not just from its physical weight, but from the moral weight of what she was about to do. But as she watched the slavers loading colonists into transport cages, she knew there was no other choice. Her first shot took down a Zulkari warrior who was threatening an elderly woman. The plasma bolt burned a hole clean through his armor, and he dropped without a sound. The second shot disabled the transport ship's engines, trapping the slavers on the ground. "For the innocent," she whispered, advancing through the smoke toward Vextar's position. "For the helpless, for everyone the Order abandoned." The battle for Haven Colony had become something more than a simple raid. It had become a test of faith, not the kind preached in cathedrals, but the kind forged in fire and tempered by the willingness to stand between evil and those who couldn't protect themselves. Behind her, Minho's fields continued to grow in the darkness, patient and eternal. Ahead of her, slavers waited with weapons drawn, ready to add her to their collection of human property. Hannah adjusted her grip on the blaster and stepped forward into the light of burning buildings. No longer a passive servant of distant gods, but an active agent of the justice they'd failed to provide. Hannah moved through the burning colony like an avenging angel, her white robes billowing in the smoke-filled air. The plasma blaster in her hand sang its deadly song, each shot precise and purposeful. She was no longer the passive nun who had stood on the auction block. She had become something new. Something dangerous. The first Zilkari warrior never saw her coming. He was dragging a young colonist toward the transport ship when Hannah's blast caught him centimass. The alien dropped instantly, his scaled armor smoking from the superheated plasma. The colonist scrambled to safety while Hannah advanced. On the next target, contact, human female, armed and hostile. One of the slavers hissed into his communicator. Hannah smiled grimly. Hostile was exactly what she intended to be. She fought with holy fury. Each shot a prayer for the oppressed, each movement guided by righteous anger that had been building since she first saw the star charts marking slave worlds. The Zilkari had superior numbers and military training, but Hannah had something they couldn't understand. The fierce determination of someone who had finally found her true calling. A group of 3 warriors tried to flank her near the grain silos. Hannah rolled behind cover as plasma bolts sizzled over her head, then popped up to return fire. Her first shot disabled one alien's weapon. Her second put him down permanently. The other 2 scattered, suddenly uncertain about engaging this unexpected threat. She's just one human. Vextar's voice roared over the battlefield communications. Take her alive. The hegemony pays extra for warrior priests. But Hannah was already moving, using the smoke and burning buildings as cover while she worked her way toward the slavers. Temporary command post. Through the chaos, she could see Jin's unconscious form being loaded into a detention cage aboard their transport ship. She had to reach him before they lifted off, the colony's defenders. Inspired by her example, began fighting back with renewed vigor. Minho appeared from behind a storage building, carrying an old hunting rifle that had probably been gathering dust for decades. Other colonists emerged from hiding with whatever weapons they could find, farming tools, construction equipment, even kitchen knives. For heaven, Minho shouted, his weathered face fierce with determination. For our freedom, the battle turned into a running firefight through the colony's streets. Hannah moved like a ghost through the smoke, appearing where the slavers least expected her. She disabled their heavy weapons platform with a well-placed shot to its power core, then vanished before they could retaliate. A massive Zilkari in command armor cornered her near the school building, his plasma cannon charging with a whine that promised death. Surrender, human. Your God cannot save you here. My God helps those who help themselves, Hannah replied, diving through a broken window as the cannon fired. The blast vaporized the wall where she'd been standing, but she was already moving, circling round to attack from an unexpected angle. Her return shot caught the commander in the gap between his helmet and chest armor. He toppled backward like a falling tree, his cannon clattering uselessly to the ground. The transport ship's engines began warming up as the surviving slavers realized their operation was falling apart. Through the vessel's transparent hull, Hannah could see prisoners being loaded into holding cells, Jin among them, finally conscious but bound with energy restraints. She had to move fast. Racing across the open ground between buildings, Hannah dodged plasma fire from the ship's defensive turrets. The automated weapons tracked her movement, but couldn't get a clean shot as she zigzagged between obstacles. At the last second, she dove under the ship's hull and attached one of Jin's plasma grenades to the landing gear support strut. The explosion rocked the transport ship, damaging its repulsors and preventing takeoff. Emergency alarms blared as the vessel listed to one side, its cargo bay doors jamming partially open. Hannah fought her way inside through the damaged entrance, her blaster ready. The ship's interior was chaos. Sparks flew from damaged control panels while emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red. Zilkari crew members scrambled to contain the damage, giving her the opening she needed. She found Jin in the detention level, bloodied but alive in a cell designed to hold dangerous prisoners. His face lit up when he saw her approaching with the cell control keypad. "Thought you didn't believe in violence," he said, grinning despite the dried blood on his forehead. "I believe in freedom more," Hannah replied, her fingers dancing over the alien controls until the energy barrier flickered and died. Jin stood slowly, testing his limbs after being bound by the restraints. "You've changed," he observed, noting the way she held the blaster like she'd been born to it. "The galaxy changed me," she said simply. "Or maybe it just showed me who I really was." They fought their way out of the transport ship together, covering each other's retreat as the remaining slavers tried one last desperate attempt to salvage their operation. Jin's twin revolvers had been returned to him by a grateful colonist, and the familiar weight of his weapons felt like greeting old friends. Outside, dawn was breaking over Haven Colony. The attack had lasted less than 2 hours, but it felt like a lifetime. Smoke still rose from damaged buildings, but the colonists were already organizing rescue teams and discussing repairs. They had defended their home successfully. Vextar lay dead near his command post, brought down by Minho's ancient hunting rifle in a final confrontation. The old farmer stood over the alien's body, his weathered hands steady despite having just taken a life for the first time in decades. "Sometimes the wolves come to your door," Minho said quietly when Hannah approached, "and sometimes you have to be willing to become a wolf yourself to protect your sheep." A week later, the Wanderer lifted off from Haven's landing field with its hull patched and its fuel tanks full. The colonists had insisted on providing supplies and repairs free of charge, payment for services rendered in their defense. Hannah stood in the ship's common area, looking at herself in a mirror. She still wore her nun's robes, but now they were paired with a gun belt and holster. The white fabric was stained with smoke and alien blood, but she made no move to change clothes. This was who she was now, faith and force walking hand in hand. "Where to now?" Jin asked from the pilot's seat as they entered hyperspace. Han looked at the star charts displayed on the navigation screen, studying the red markers that indicated slave worlds throughout the galaxy. There were so many of them, so many places where human beings were bought and sold like livestock while their supposed protectors looked the other way. "Wherever slavery exists," she said, her voice carrying a steel that hadn't been there before, "God helps those who help themselves, and apparently we're the help he's sending." Jin smiled and laid in a course for the Kepler system, where intelligence reports suggested a major slave auction was scheduled for the following month. "Think the galaxy's ready for a gunslinging non. The galaxy better get ready," Hannah replied, checking her weapons power cell, "because we're coming whether it likes it or not." They traveled deeper into space, two unlikely partners united by a shared mission behind them. Haven Colony continued its peaceful existence under alien stars. Ahead of them lay a galaxy full of injustice, oppression, and people who needed someone willing to fight for their freedom. The stars themselves seemed to approve of their mission, burning bright and steady in the void like beacons calling them forward. Somewhere in the darkness, slavers were conducting their evil business, secure in the knowledge that no one would challenge them. They were about to learn how wrong they could be. The Wanderer vanished into hyperspace, carrying its crew toward their destiny. In the ship's small chapel, His space Hannah had converted from a storage locker to weapons hung on the wall beside a simple wooden cross, faith and force. United at last in service of a higher calling, humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology or its numbers. It was the refusal to bow to oppression, the willingness to stand up and fight when fighting was necessary, and in the infinite darkness between the stars. That strength burned brighter than any sun. The end.